How old are all these fellas?
Well, there's 218, 120, and...
Ed Sullivan exposed 9 golden age stars he wished he'd never put on his stage because of their racism. For 23 years, Sullivan ruled the most watched show in American TV history, introducing the biggest names in entertainment to over 50 million people every Sunday night. His show didn't just entertain, it made legends. Unknown performers became instant stars, shaping American pop culture like nothing else on TV. "If Ed booked you," one former producer said, "America knew your name by morning." He was the ultimate gatekeeper, and he took that power seriously. But behind the spotlight, that power weighed heavy on him. A longtime stage manager revealed that Sullivan kept private notes, not just about performances, but about behavior backstage, the stuff viewers never saw. Sometimes, after a performer left, Ed would quietly tell his team, "That's the last time they're on my stage." What truly upset him wasn't ego or attitude. It was the racism he witnessed up close. He saw singers who demanded segregated dressing rooms, entertainers who stole black music but refused to share the stage with black artists, and smiling TV icons hiding ugly beliefs behind perfect public images. Even worse, some of the most adored figures in America were guilty. There was the so-called clean-cut crooner who made millions covering black musicians without giving them credit, while openly rejecting integration. Then the patriotic hero who sang racist songs between his performances of God Bless America, and the beloved cowboy star who ran a segregated entertainment empire while preaching fairness to kids. And topping the list, Sullivan's biggest regret of all, the young man he gave 3 legendary spots to, the appearances that made him the king. His entire career was built on black musical styles. Yet those closest to him documented his racist attitudes that left even Sullivan stunned. Every time Ed introduced one of these performers, 50 million Americans watched. His stage gave them legitimacy, and that's what haunted him most. But before we get to the king, let's start with number 9, the so-called wholesome singer who fooled America with his charm but hid a darker side. Number 9, Pat Boone, the clean-cut singer who stole black music and openly opposed integration. When Boone hit the Ed Sullivan stage, 50 million people saw exactly what Ed promised, a polite, well-groomed young man who looked like the perfect alternative to dangerous rock and roll. With his spotless white shoes and that charming grin, he sold the image of traditional American decency. Sullivan even introduced him as the safe opposite to Elvis Presley's wild side, but behind that polished smile was a cold, calculated plan. Boone's entire career was built on covering songs from black artists, turning raw, soulful music into watered-down versions that white radio would play. While Boone got rich, the original artists barely got airplay. From 1955 to 1959, Boone cranked out hit after hit, Ain't That a Shame by Fats Domino, Tutti Frutti, and Long Tall Sally by Little Richard, all originally created by black musicians. His label had it all mapped out. They'd track what black artists were recording, rush Boone into the studio, and use their radio ties to flood white audiences with his sanitized versions. Little Richard never forgot it. He once wrote that watching Boone's version of Tutti Frutti climb the charts while his original got buried was heartbreaking. "Pat made my songs into nursery rhymes," Richard said. "He took everything that made them alive and turned them into something safe for white people." But what made Boone's actions even worse was his open stance against integration. In the late 1950s, Boone publicly supported segregationist views, while his career thrived off the culture he stole. One 1958 Sullivan Show incident exposed it all. When Ed considered booking a black performer on the same episode, Boone's management made it clear they didn't want him appearing on integrated shows. Sullivan was deeply unsettled. His wife Sylvia later revealed that Ed would stand in the wings, shaking his head as Boone performed, disturbed by how different the man was from his clean image. That moment stuck with him, proof that fame had blinded him to integrity. Boone never apologized or gave credit to the black artists who made his success possible. He hid behind his Christian image while his business thrived on exploitation. His brand of wholesome entertainment was built on cultural theft, and the racism beneath it was wrapped up in charm and respectability. Sullivan would later see it as one of his biggest booking regrets, a reminder that the brightest smiles can hide the darkest truths. But Boone wasn't the only one who fooled America. Next came number 8, Kate Smith, the patriotic sweetheart whose powerful voice inspired millions. Until people discovered the shocking racism hidden behind her most famous songs. Kate Smith, the woman whose booming voice made God Bless America a national anthem of pride. Her powerful, heartfelt performances made her seem like the living symbol of American values. Sullivan often brought her out for patriotic specials, calling her the voice of the nation. But decades later, hidden recordings revealed a shocking truth. The same voice that stirred patriotic hearts also sang songs drenched in racism. In 1931, Smith recorded "That's Why Darkies Were Born," a song that romanticized slavery and justified racial oppression. Music archives even show she performed similar songs throughout the 1930s, lyrics that made light of deep pain. Historians found evidence that Smith appeared in blackface on early radio shows and kept doing it well into the late 30s. It was all documented in broadcast archives and newspaper reviews that painted a disturbing picture. What horrified Sullivan most wasn't just her past, it was her attitude decades later. Even as the country began to change, Smith refused to perform for integrated audiences. A 1956 report from civil rights groups documented her canceling an entire concert rather than singing for a mixed crowd. And when she came on The Sullivan Show, her team made strict demands. No integrated seating, no black musicians, no black backup singers, nothing that would break her traditions. In one 1960 incident, stage managers recalled Smith objecting to black stagehands even being visible during her performance. By then, Sullivan was featuring more black artists on his show and trying to reflect the changing world. But Smith's rules clashed hard with that. According to his producers, Ed reluctantly gave in to her conditions just to avoid live confrontation, but privately, he hated it. He couldn't stand the hypocrisy of her singing "God Bless America" while excluding millions of Americans from that blessing. Ed would say, "She sings about America, but she only means part of it." His wife Sylvia recalled years later that contradiction ate at him. The woman celebrated as the nation's voice didn't stand for everyone. When her racist recordings resurfaced in 2019, the public was shocked. People couldn't believe that the same woman who symbolized patriotism had a history of segregationist beliefs so thoroughly documented. Sullivan never knew about those exact recordings, but he'd already seen enough. Her refusal to perform for integrated audiences and her demands behind the scenes made him regret ever giving her that stage. Smith's version of patriotism came wrapped in a flag, but underneath was exclusion and prejudice, and Ed knew it. While her voice echoed as America's song, her actions proved she didn't mean all of America. Up next was another figure who masked discrimination behind a charming image. Number 7, Perry Como. The man known as Mr. Nice Guy seemed harmless and calm, the definition of smooth and easygoing entertainment. His voice soothed millions, and Sullivan called him television's perfect gentleman. But that calm exterior hid a quiet form of exclusion that lasted for years. Como's TV show ran from 1948 to 1963, right through the civil rights era, and according to network diversity records, it featured almost no black performers at all. No guest stars, no backup singers, not even musicians in his orchestra. According to internal NBC files, Perry Como had full approval power over every song arrangement and guest appearance on his show. Multiple memos from the 1950s showed proposals for black musical guests, each one marked with Como's quiet rejection. A 1957 note from his own music director exposed his mindset completely. When the director suggested using integrated backup singers for a Christmas special, Como reportedly said his audience expected a certain kind of show, and that having integrated performers would make viewers uncomfortable. Behind the smooth crooner image was a man guarding an all-white stage. Promoters who booked him confirmed that his contracts required all-white orchestras and backup singers. One 1962 touring agreement even spelled it out: no black musicians allowed. On the Ed Sullivan Show, crew members noticed how uneasy Como got when black artists were part of the same lineup. A stage manager recalled Como timing his entrances and exits just to avoid crossing paths with them backstage. Sullivan caught on quickly. Sometimes he'd purposely schedule Como alongside black guests just to see how he'd react. One producer remembered that while Perry stayed polite on camera, his discomfort behind the curtain was impossible to miss. What made it worse was that Como's sound, his smooth tone and rhythm, was rooted in black jazz and blues traditions. Yet he never once gave public credit or spoke out for the artists who inspired him. As the 1960s went on, Sullivan began booking him less and less. Perry still had a loyal audience, but Ed couldn't ignore the contradiction anymore. He kept quiet publicly, Sullivan was too professional to air personal conflicts, but those close to him knew his respect for Como had faded. While Perry Como's racism was subtle and systematic, the next performer's was loud, visible, and institutionalized. Number 6. Lawrence Welk, the smiling band leader who built his empire on exclusion. When Lawrence Welk graced the Sullivan stage, America saw the cheerful host behind the champagne music sound. His thick accent and gentle manner made him seem harmless, the definition of old-fashioned wholesomeness. Sullivan introduced him as the man whose music brings everyone together. But behind that bubbly image was a rigid rule that lasted 3 full decades. No black musicians allowed, ever. From 1951 all the way to 1982, 31 years of weekly national television, Welk's orchestra never once hired a black performer, not one. Former musicians and auditioning artists confirmed it over and over. A black trumpet player who tried out in 1965 remembered being told directly, "Mr. Welk prefers to keep the orchestra traditional." He knew exactly what that meant: whites only. The exclusion wasn't just passive, it was deliberate policy. And what made it so disturbing was how long it lasted, even through the height of the civil rights era. While the rest of America was marching toward progress, Welk's band stayed frozen in a fantasy world where only one color of musician existed. To millions watching at home, his show looked innocent and family-friendly. But behind the bright smiles and polite polkas was an unspoken rule that defined his entire career, a rule that Ed Sullivan eventually couldn't ignore. While other TV shows slowly began integrating through the late 1950s and 60s, Lawrence Welk refused to budge. His all-white orchestra policy stayed firm, no matter how much the world around him changed. Network diversity reports repeatedly flagged his show as one of the least inclusive on air, but nothing changed. Former band members later revealed that Welk personally approved every hire, and everyone on set knew exactly what that meant. Larry wanted a certain look, one former musician explained, and black performers didn't fit that look. It wasn't a secret, it was a silent rule. On The Ed Sullivan Show, Welk's all-white band stood out sharply against Ed's increasingly integrated productions. By the early 60s, Sullivan had black artists performing regularly and even hired diverse staff behind the scenes. A 1964 backstage story captured the tension perfectly. Welk reportedly commented that Ed's orchestra looked different from what he was used to, a thinly veiled jab at the integrated setup. Sullivan's producer later said Ed used Welk as an example in diversity meetings, proof of how outdated some entertainers still were. What really frustrated Sullivan was that Welk didn't even see the problem. He wasn't hiding his segregation. He genuinely thought his traditional orchestra was just part of his brand. Welk passed away in 1992, never once admitting that his 30-plus-year exclusion of black musicians was wrong. His legacy as a wholesome, smiling bandleader stayed spotless in the public eye, with most obituaries ignoring the discrimination that defined his career. To Sullivan, it was a reminder that racism didn't always shout. It could smile through a song and call itself family entertainment. But Welk's quiet segregation wasn't the oldest story on Ed's regret list. Next came an entertainer from a darker, earlier chapter of showbiz. Number 5, Sophie Tucker, the vaudeville queen whose fame was built in part on blackface performances. When Sophie Tucker appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show during the 1950s and early 60s, audiences saw a living link to vaudeville's golden age. Known as the last of the red-hot mamas, Tucker was already a legend. Sullivan introduced her with deep respect, calling her a pioneer who'd opened doors for generations of performers. But what most viewers didn't realize, though historians had documented it for years, was that Tucker's early career leaned heavily on racist stage traditions. She built her early fame performing in blackface and appropriating the very black musical styles she refused to share credit for. Historians trace her blackface acts back to the early 1900s, shows she kept doing well into the 1920s. Back then, theater managers reportedly told her she didn't fit the mold for a straight performer, so they encouraged her to use blackface, claiming it would make audiences focus on her voice instead of her looks. Even in her own 1945 autobiography, Tucker wrote candidly about that era, showing how normalized such performances were in early entertainment. What Sullivan later realized, though, was that by celebrating Tucker without acknowledging that past, he was helping to whitewash an era of open racism in show business. Sophie Tucker never saw blackface as anything wrong. To her, it was just stage makeup, no different from a costume or wig. Even decades later, she wrote about it without the slightest regret or awareness of how deeply harmful it was. What made her use of blackface especially disturbing was how her entire musical style came straight from the jazz and blues of black female singers she studied and imitated, then re-performed in blackface for white audiences who wouldn't dare attend shows by the real artists. Her relationship with actual black musicians was often one-sided and exploitative. Testimonies from that era describe Tucker treating them like hired help instead of collaborators. One black pianist who worked with her in the 1930s said she took credit for arrangements he created. She used their talent to build her brand, then shut them out of the spotlight. By the time Tucker appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, she'd long stopped performing in blackface. But her attitude hadn't changed much. A 1959 stage report told of a chilling comment she made backstage about a young black singer waiting to perform. Tucker allegedly said that in her day, that singer wouldn't have been allowed back here, and maybe that was better because everyone knew their place. That line stunned Sullivan's team. By the late 50s, Ed was working hard to integrate his show and open doors for black artists. Hearing Tucker dismiss that progress made him rethink his nostalgia for the old vaudeville days. According to his producers, that was the moment his admiration turned to disappointment. Her final appearance came in 1963, 2 years before her death. Sullivan stayed professional as always, but privately he decided that her time on his stage was over. He no longer wanted to give airtime to stars whose attitudes were stuck in another century. Tucker's legacy symbolized showbiz's early, open racism, but Sullivan soon found that prejudice didn't vanish with jazz and vaudeville. Even rock and roll, the genre praised for rebellion and progress, had its own dark corners. Number 4, the Rolling Stones, the so-called rebels who built their empire on black music, but demanded white-only backstage crews. When the Stones hit the Ed Sullivan Show in 1964, America saw wild, gritty young Brits channeling the spirit of the blues. Mick Jagger spoke passionately about his love for Muddy Waters, while Keith Richards called black blues guitarists his teachers. They even named their band after a Muddy Waters song. Everything about their image screamed respect for black artistry, but behind the scenes, things didn't match the image. According to Sullivan's staff, the band's behavior backstage painted a different story. Crew members recalled that during their 1965 appearance, the Stones' management specifically requested that their dressing rooms be handled only by white staff. The request caused immediate tension, especially since Sullivan's backstage team had become one of the most integrated in television. Staff remembered the awkwardness as the so-called blues-loving band quietly enforced their own form of segregation, proving that admiration for black music didn't always come with respect for black people. What made the Rolling Stones' behavior especially disturbing was the contrast between what they said and what they did. In public, they spoke passionately about their love for black musicians. But backstage, they created segregated spaces that kept black workers out. In a 1965 Melody Maker interview, Mick Jagger even made crude remarks about black neighborhoods using ugly stereotypes that shocked readers. When black British musicians called him out, Jagger brushed it off as just observations instead of owning up or apologizing. Keith Richards wasn't innocent either. His so-called compliments about black musicians having natural rhythm and instinctive feel came off as patronizing, reducing genius to biology instead of giving credit for artistry and skill. What truly disturbed Ed Sullivan was realizing how much the Stones profited from the very culture they claimed to honor. Their fame and fortune came from covering black blues songs, while the originators, like Muddy Waters, struggled financially. The irony was brutal. The band named after his song became millionaires while he barely got by. Even worse, during their southern U.S. tours in the mid-1960s, the Stones performed at segregated venues without protest. They didn't enforce segregation themselves, but they also didn't challenge it. For a band that claimed to love black music, their silence spoke volumes. Sullivan's discomfort grew with each appearance. He couldn't deny their star power. Millions tuned in when the Stones performed. But privately, he questioned what message it sent. How could he celebrate artists who praised black culture in interviews yet ignored the people behind it in real life? And if the Stones' racism hid behind musical respect, Sullivan's next revelation showed that even Hollywood's most beloved stars could shock him just as deeply. Number 3. Judy Garland, America's sweetheart, Dorothy herself, who used racial slurs backstage. When Garland stepped onto the Ed Sullivan Show, audiences saw a fragile, tragic icon. The woman who sang "Over the Rainbow" survived MGM's cruelty and battled addiction. Sullivan treated her with care and tenderness, presenting her as a symbol of endurance and vulnerability. But behind that fragile image was a much more complicated truth. The woman millions pitied was also capable of inflicting pain, especially toward black performers and musicians who worked with her. Garland's relationship with singer Lena Horne revealed a troubling pattern. Though Garland publicly praised Horne's brilliance, she never pushed for equal billing or recognition. MGM's internal records showed that Garland had final approval on promotional materials, and she never used that power to help Horne get fair treatment. Even more disturbing were the testimonies from musicians who toured with Garland in the 1960s. Multiple memoirs described her using racial slurs during rehearsals and backstage when she was frustrated or under the influence. One pianist from her 1964 tour recalled her tossing out offensive language casually during sound checks, as if it was nothing. To the public, Judy Garland was the face of innocence, a victim of Hollywood's system. But to those who worked beside her, she could be cruel in ways that betrayed that image. Sullivan, who had adored her as a performer, was crushed when he learned about the things she said behind the curtain. Judy Garland's backstage language created serious tension within her integrated touring crew. Some recalled that she either didn't realize how offensive her words were, or worse, she simply didn't care, knowing those she insulted had no real power to speak up. Even her short-lived Judy Garland show, 1963-64, reflected that blind spot. While other variety programs were starting to integrate, Garland's show included very few black performers. When they did appear, they were rarely featured in sketches or recurring segments, just brief musical cameos that kept them on the sidelines. Then came a shocking 1967 nightclub incident in New York, witnessed by staff and patrons alike. Garland allegedly made insulting remarks about black audience members she thought were being disruptive, remarks that stunned everyone within earshot. What made it so painful was the betrayal. Garland had become a symbol of survival, strength, and compassion, a figure adored by countless marginalized communities. But her behavior showed that personal pain doesn't automatically translate into empathy for others. She embodied resilience on stage while ignoring her own prejudice off it. Sullivan was heartbroken when reports about Garland's racist comments reached him. At first, he refused to believe them. He'd always viewed her as fragile, misunderstood, and deserving of protection. But when multiple staff members told the same story, he couldn't deny it anymore. He realized that the star he'd tried to shield from Hollywood's cruelty was also capable of causing harm herself. When Garland died in 1969, her legacy remained untouchable. Obituaries mourned her tragedy and celebrated her brilliance, barely mentioning the troubling accounts of racism left behind. For Sullivan, it was another reminder that even the most beloved icons could carry shadows the public never saw. But the next name on his private list took hypocrisy to a whole new level. Number 2, Gene Autry, the singing cowboy who built a multi-million-dollar empire on segregation while preaching fairness to children. When Gene Autry appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, America saw a clean-cut cowboy hero, a man who sang about honesty, kindness, and helping others. Sullivan introduced him as a true American symbol. But behind the charm and cowboy code, Autry ran an entertainment empire that quietly enforced racial exclusion at every level. Autry wasn't just a performer, he was a mogul. From the 1940s through the 1970s, he owned multiple radio stations, a production company, and rodeo events across the country. And according to archived memos and station playlists, his businesses had explicit policies banning music by black artists. A 1952 internal memo flat out stated that songs by black performers would not be aired, no matter how popular they became. His TV production company followed the same pattern. Hundreds of episodes, all-white casts, and no black actors in speaking roles. Production notes showed that Autry personally signed off on every casting choice. Multiple former employees later admitted there was an unwritten rule that kept black workers out of visible or leadership positions. Everyone knew Gene wanted things traditional, one assistant said. And traditional meant white. Even Autry's rodeos reflected that mindset. When he toured through the South, his events had segregated seating wherever local laws allowed it, and he never objected. The cowboy who preached fairness and equality on screen made sure his business stayed divided behind the scenes. Unlike some artists who refused to play in segregated venues, Gene Autry's empire had no problem enforcing segregation wherever it was the law. His business managers went along with local restrictions without a fight, keeping things separate in every city he toured. A 1956 report revealed that Autry even refused to condemn segregation in neighborhoods where he owned property. When asked to back integrated housing, he declined, claiming he was just protecting property values, a phrase civil rights activists immediately recognized as coded racism. And when Autry bought the California Angels baseball team in 1961, his pattern continued. Under his ownership, the Angels quickly became one of the least diverse teams in Major League Baseball. Former black players later revealed that the franchise had a reputation for avoiding black talent and creating an unwelcoming environment for those who did make the roster. For Ed Sullivan, this was devastating. He'd grown up watching Autry's cowboy films, admiring his songs about honesty, fairness, and helping others, discovering that the singing cowboy ran his business empire through quiet segregation, and selective morality was a betrayal he couldn't shake. He often mentioned Autry in private conversations about hypocrisy in Hollywood, how a man could sing about justice while upholding injustice behind the scenes. When Autry died in 1998, his wholesome legend stayed spotless. Obituaries praised his movies, music, and team ownership, but skipped over the systematic discrimination that defined his business legacy. To Sullivan, it was the perfect example of America's selective memory, celebrating the myth and ignoring the truth. But if Gene Autry's hypocrisy bothered Sullivan, his #1 regret cut far deeper, the performer who became his most famous booking and his greatest mistake. Number 1, Elvis Presley, the king who used racial slurs and stole black music. When Elvis made his first Ed Sullivan Show appearance on September 9, 1956, over 60 million Americans watched. It was one of the most watched broadcasts in television history. Sullivan, who had once vowed never to book Elvis because of his wild image, eventually gave in and helped launch the king into superstardom. But what Sullivan didn't know then was that the man he introduced to America had built his entire career on music born from black artistry, while holding racist attitudes toward the very people who inspired it. Elvis's sound was black music. He recorded songs first performed by black artists, learned gospel from black churches in Memphis, and picked up his stage style from performers on Beale Street. Rock and roll itself came from black musicians, but Elvis became the one who cashed in on it. For many who worked around him, that contradiction was hard to ignore. He celebrated the sound, but not the people. Behind the spotlight, multiple witnesses recalled Elvis making derogatory comments about black folks, statements that reduced them to stereotypes or dismissed their artistry entirely. Sullivan, who once called Elvis the future of music, later learned how deep that hypocrisy ran. The same performer who made millions off black music reportedly viewed black artists only as a means to an end, a source of profit, not respect. While Elvis later denied making racist remarks, many black musicians in Memphis remembered hearing similar comments, from him or from people in his circle. What no one disputes, though, is his refusal to publicly credit the black artists who shaped his entire sound or to use his massive fame to lift them up. Sam Phillips, the man who discovered Elvis, later admitted that Presley was uneasy, talking about how deeply his music was rooted in black culture. Elvis preferred to present his sound as original, something uniquely his, rather than the product of styles he borrowed from others. Blues legend B.B. King spoke carefully, saying Elvis was polite in person, but avoided being seen publicly with black artists, afraid it might affect his image. Little Richard was more blunt. In interviews, he said Elvis borrowed heavily from his performance style, the swagger, the shouts, the showmanship, but never gave him credit. Elvis had built a kingdom out of black music while keeping its creators at arm's length. Even at home in Graceland, the divide was clear. Staff recalled that Elvis's social life stayed mostly white. He might have worked with black musicians on stage, but offstage, his inner circle stayed segregated. Black employees at Graceland were limited to service roles, rarely included in personal gatherings or business decisions. Backstage at the Ed Sullivan Show, the same pattern showed up again. Crew members from all 3 of his appearances said Elvis seemed uneasy around black staff. One stage manager remembered that he only interacted comfortably with white crew members, creating awkward tension in what had become one of the most integrated productions on TV. What made Elvis's silence especially troubling was the timing. He rose to superstardom right in the middle of the civil rights movement, the Montgomery bus boycott, the Little Rock School integration, the start of nationwide protests for equality. Elvis held enormous influence over young white Americans who were forming their views on race. And yet, he said nothing. He never used his platform to support black artists, speak on justice, or even acknowledge where his music came from. At first, Sullivan didn't see it that way. Back in the 50s, he was focused on Elvis's wild energy and the ratings his performances brought in. But by the 1960s, as Ed became more vocal about racial equality and began showcasing more black performers, he realized what those early bookings had really meant. According to his wife, Sylvia, Sullivan would watch civil rights coverage on TV and shake his head when Elvis appeared. "I made him America's idol," he'd say, and he never once used that influence for good. That regret stayed with him for the rest of his life. Sullivan had given Elvis one of the biggest platforms in entertainment history, and the king had used it to glorify himself, not the people whose music built his throne. According to NBC crew members, Elvis even objected to having black dancers included in certain segments of his 1968 comeback special. He insisted that scenes stay segregated, keeping white and black performers apart on camera. It was a chilling reminder that even at the height of his fame, his attitudes hadn't evolved. In his later years, Ed Sullivan often looked back on his career and the choices that defined it. Among his deepest regrets was the night he helped make Elvis a superstar. "I thought I was just booking a singer," Sullivan once said. "I didn't realize I was crowning a king who ruled over stolen territory." The ultimate irony cut deep. Elvis Presley, the so-called king of rock and roll, had built his throne on black music, black rhythm, and black creativity, yet carried a dismissive view toward the very people who gave that art to the world. Sullivan had given him the crown, and it haunted him for the rest of his life. Elvis died in 1977, just 3 years after Sullivan, his cultural status untouchable. Most tributes praised his music and charisma, but few dared to mention the contradictions, the way he profited from black innovation while keeping his distance from black people. Those truths stayed buried beneath the legend. But Sullivan's regret wasn't just about Elvis. It was about an entire generation of entertainers who used his stage to rise to power while quietly reinforcing discrimination. These weren't random moments or relics of a different time. They were deliberate, systemic choices made by people who shaped America's entertainment identity. Sullivan's show had been a mirror of the nation. Pat Boone's cultural theft, Kate Smith's racist songs, Perry Como's quiet exclusion, Lawrence Welk's all-white orchestra, Sophie Tucker's blackface legacy, the Rolling Stones' selective admiration, Judy Garland's slurs, Gene Autry's segregated empire, and Elvis Presley's stolen sound paired with racist attitudes. Each one of them stood beneath Sullivan's spotlight, reaching millions of homes, and in doing so, they didn't just shape popular culture. They shaped how America understood race, music, and morality. Ed Sullivan couldn't erase those broadcasts, but he came to understand the weight of what he'd done. According to his family, in his later years, he spoke often about the difference between fame and integrity. The man who once brought joy to millions realized that sometimes the greatest applause went to those least deserving of it. So now it's your turn to think about it. Which revelation shocked you the most? Did you know about these documented patterns of racism and hypocrisy behind entertainment's golden age? Sullivan's stage was America's stage, and understanding who we chose to elevate helps us see the truth behind the legends. If you found this deep dive eye-opening, drop your thoughts in the comments below, hit that like button, and subscribe for more untold stories from the hidden side of entertainment history. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.